Hi, I'm Bob Mann, discussing matters of mutual concern on the radio at WFDU 89.1 FM and on the web at WFDU.FM. This is WFDU's award-winning weekly public affairs series. We talk about politics, education, healthcare, things that in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, tri-state area are matters of mutual concern. I'm very happy to have on the program someone who I admire very much, and he's a fellow broadcaster, a fellow professor, but in addition to that, he is an author and an executive trainer, an executive coach in areas of public speaking, communication, and leadership, and you know his name. You've seen him on television, Steve Adubato, and he has a brand new book called Lessons in Leadership, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about on the program today. Steve, thanks for doing the local program.
Bob, it is my honor and pleasure to be with you today, and I hope all is well with you and your audience.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the concept of lessons in leadership. You are someone who has many interests, and communication, though, I would say, is one of the things which defines you the most. Talk a little bit about the relationship between good communication skills and leadership, because leadership is not just barking orders.
Not only is it not just barking orders, that's the last thing a good leader should be doing. And so when I talk about leadership, and I try to teach, coach, write, and think about leadership in terms of how do you move people, how do you motivate people, how do you get people to move in a certain direction, how do you engage people. And you can't really do that, and you know that, Bob, from your work and from your teaching and everything you do. And anyone who's in a position to connect with people, you cannot do that without being an excellent communicator, and very often people think that simply means, well, you have to be a great orator, a great public speaker. And the fact is, it's not only not that simple, but you don't have to be a great orator. You have to be a great listener. You have to be a great facilitator. You have to be a great question asker. You have to be someone who's curious. You have to be someone who cares about other people. And those are the qualities of a great communicator. If you happen to be someone who can motivate and inspire in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy or Ronald Reagan, that's fine. But the fact is, it's not required, and in fact, there are people who are great speakers and orators who are terrible leaders because they lack the other qualities of empathy, emotional intelligence, curiosity, the ability to listen, be engaged, and ultimately care about other people. So that's why I say you can't really talk about leadership without understanding superior communication skills.
When you talk, though, about the all-time greats, the Kennedys, the Kings, people of that nature, you do realize, though, that there are people who can bore you. They could be great leaders. They could care. They could listen. There's got to be something that people can learn if they have the ability to listen, the other talents to lead, but they really are either afraid of public speaking or they're data dumpers, as we'll talk about later, because that's part of your book is Don't Be a Data Dumper. What are some of the things that, if it's not a natural, God-given talent for you, that you can do to at least make that communication skill a bit better to the people you lead?
You mean the public presentation part?
Yes, the public presentation part that so many people probably overemphasize, as you just mentioned. But what can you do if you're a good leader in every other way, but you need to tweak that just a bit? For example, the things you do in your coaching.
Well, it's interesting because there is a chapter in Lessons in Leadership that's simply called Great Leaders Deliver Powerful Presentations, and here's why that's in there, and here's how I'll respond to your question. No, you don't have to be this natural-born great orator. And by the way, Dr. King and John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan and others who were great orators were not natural-born. They were trained. They were coached. They practiced. They worked at it. They weren't all that good. The Bill Clintons of the world, who were considered great orators at one point, were ridiculed because, as you well know, the speech he gave at the Democratic National Convention to nominate someone else for president was ridiculed because it was boring and it was long and didn't connect with the audience. And he sat down and said, God, how could I be so bad? What did I do wrong? How do I get better? And that's the first rule. How committed are you to getting better? The first rule is a commitment to improvement, a commitment to get better. And so what I say to people is, look, it's a funny thing when you say this to people. You need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I'll also often tell our children who are, our two boys are 12 and 14, and I have an older boy who's 24 from my first marriage who's teaching at a local Catholic high school in New Jersey. And none of them are, quote, natural-born speakers. In fact, I mean, having me as a dad must be really tough, because I'll say to them when they have a presentation to give, like, let me see you do this, and we'll take out these index cards and we'll start reading.
It's like being Mickey Mantle's kid.
No, not really. That. And by the way, Mickey Mantle has a whole bunch of other stories about having Mutt Mantle, his father, which put different pressure on him. But I'll just say this. I'll tell my kids, put those index cards away. Stop reading. Tell me the message you want to get across. And I'll say, Dad, I need these index cards. And there's a point to this, trust me. I'll say, what is the main message you want to get across? And they'll say things like, Dad, I can't do this without the cards. I can't do this without reading. And I'll say, no, that's actually not true. Ask yourself, what is the point you want to get across to the other kids in this class, to your teachers, to, if you're running, our son just ran for student council president. And he said, Dad, if I don't read it, how can I do it? I'm more comfortable that way. And I said, son, look, I know you're more comfortable that way, but if your eyes are down at that piece of paper or those cards, why would you expect the other kids in the class to be interested in what you're saying if you're sitting there with your eyes down? You're not even looking at them. You're not connecting with them. So I said, let's get you, more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so the point is this. You have to work through those uncomfortable feelings. Accept the fact that you will be uncomfortable for a period of time. So to be a competent, effective public speaker, accept the fact that it's anxiety-producing. Accept the fact that it's nerve-wracking. Accept the fact that it's uncomfortable. And you have to get through that, because if you always stay in your so-called comfort zone, I'm comfortable doing it this way. I'm comfortable reading my speeches. I'm comfortable reading off this PowerPoint presentation. You will be comfortable. Your audience will be uninspired, unmoved, and bored. So you not only will not be an effective presenter, you'll be a terrible leader who doesn't move and motivate and inspire people. That's what I mean. The first rule of being an effective presenter in public is to realize that being uncomfortable is part of it. And stop saying, I'm not comfortable doing this, because what great point guard in basketball who plays with his or her right hand? I'm comfortable with my right hand. I'm comfortable dribbling with my right hand. So Michael Jordan, back in the day, I'm comfortable with my right hand. The coach says, now you need to move your left hand because they're playing you to that side, your right side. And he says, well, I'm comfortable with my right hand. If he keeps dribbling with his right hand, they play him that way. They can steal the ball. Ultimately, he has to get more comfortable dribbling with his left hand until he's more comfortable. That's what makes you great.
Well, one
of
the things you mentioned is a perfect segue for me here, which is I'm comfortable with this PowerPoint presentation. And you and I have had discussions off the air about PowerPoint, and it can be good, and Prezi can be good, and it can be an adjunct and emphasize things. But so many people will very often just give you endless statistics, and you call them data dumpers. People demand data today, but it can just be an eyes-glazing, boring fest. So talk a little bit about the need to provide real facts to the people you lead or the people to whom you're reporting, but also not being that data dumper.
Bob, you raised a really great point. I was coaching a chief financial officer of a major corporation a couple of years back, and he was getting ready for a presentation before the board of trustees. I mean, this is a major presentation. And he's telling me, he's looking at his PowerPoint presentation. He's got 70 slides with all these numbers, and the numbers are tiny, and there's these charts and graphs. And he's reading off the charts and the graphs. He's going through the numbers. And finally I said to him, hey, Jim, let me ask you a question. If we took those PowerPoint slides away and you had to tell me what the main point behind all these numbers were, like what they really meant to the company, like what's at stake with those numbers, what's behind those numbers, analyze what the numbers mean and the question or the issues we had to consider and what your recommendation was, what would you tell us? And he goes, well, I couldn't do that.
So he didn't understand his own stats.
He goes, well, I need the numbers. It's all about the numbers.
Oh, boy.
And I said, Jim, it's actually not all about the numbers. He goes, yes, it is. I'm a CFO. I'm a chief financial officer. It's always about the numbers. I said, Jim, it's actually not about the numbers. The numbers, everybody can read. What they don't know and they don't understand and why they need you as a leader is to break through and help them analyze and understand what the numbers mean, why they matter, strategically what the company is facing, and what you recommend as to what those numbers mean, what the trends are, the decisions the company has to make. That's not a PowerPoint presentation where you're dumping data and numbers on them. That's where you're engaged in a conversation with them about the future of the company. And he just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language that he didn't understand, and he was disgusted that the company had hired me to be an executive coach in communication and leadership, and he just kept repeating, it's all about the numbers. And I said, sorry, it's not. And I had to engage the CEO and say, look, I think you have the wrong CFO.
Wow.
I really do. You have the wrong CFO, because a CFO who believes, quote, it's all about the numbers instead of what those numbers truly mean, what the trends are, what the questions are, what the strategic issues connected with them are, as opposed to dumping data, is the wrong CFO. Because why don't you just send us an email with your attachment with the numbers? We don't even need you. We need a leader to break them down.
It's really interesting because I imagine the world of an executive coach, somebody who has a reputation coming in and just getting thank you, thank you, thank you. But of course you're going to get resistance too in that aspect of your career, because these are alpha type A's who have always felt that they're doing it right. So I guess you have to really stand your ground with them as you go in there, despite your reputation.
You know, it's the executive coaching part of my work. I mean, you've taught for many years, and you've gotten the gratification of students who say, you know, Professor Mann, you've changed my life. You've given me a way of looking at things. You've helped me in so many ways. And you know, and the few times I've gotten that, I will tell you, it's the greatest feeling in the world. The flip side of that, particularly, and students, I'm going to argue that students in general, and listen, they're all students are all ages in this particular period of time, and that's a great thing because students are going back to school at all ages. But I'm going to argue that one of the challenges when you're doing executive coaching is dealing with people who are absolutely convinced that they have it right. And that this is it. Pretty much the way they do it is the way to do it. And one of the chapters in Lessons in Leadership, my new book, is called Great Leaders Are Lifelong Learners. And what I simply mean by that is this. The leader who says he or she has it right, the leader who says, this is it, I'm done, there's no more learning because I have figured it out, is the leader who's dangerous. Because the leader who stops reading, the leader who stops asking questions and being curious and wanting the advice and feedback from other people can't grow. And I've had people who I've had to deal with. The company brings you in, the board of trustees brings you in, the CEO brings you in, you do succession planning where they're looking at 3 or 4 different people, and you're coaching them and you're making recommendations as to who you think might be the right person. You don't make the decision, but you're just consulting and giving that advice. And I've had people say, and I remember a particular chief operating officer, he was 56, 57 years old, top of his game, wanting to go from CEO to COO to CEO. And I remember he said to me, Steve, I'm 56, 57 years old. What are you going to tell me? What are you going to tell me that I don't know already?
Wow.
I'm done. I am absolutely done. And I think this is the dumbest thing the company's ever done.
Yeah, he was done all right.
He was done. No, he was done.
Wow.
Because then the question becomes, if he becomes the CEO, what kind of culture, Bob, does he create in the company in terms of developing future talent, creating a learning environment, helping people become future leaders, training and development? I'm sitting there going, oh my God. I said, okay, Peter, I guess you're done.
Well, congratulations, Peter. You're on your way. You're done.
Yeah. I have nothing else to learn. So I said, listen. So I watched him present, and it was incredibly boring. And I said, why don't you create a more conversational tone? He goes, well, who wants to be in a conversation? I said, okay, I guess you figured it out. And so my point is, I mean, they're the exception. I mean,
right.
To be very candid, they are the exception. But to act like that doesn't happen when you're in this business, if you're any good at this, your job is to try to create an environment that helps the other person realize that they have everything to gain and nothing to lose by being open to feedback. And again, I know I've said this several times, but one of the chapters in the book that simply says great leaders are open to feedback even when they hate hearing it. They just don't want to. Who wants to hear? I remember teaching a course at Rutgers University, my alma mater, and in the business school a few years back. And you know when you get the student evaluations and you expect, oh, Dr. Adubato, this was great. You're great. You know, you changed my life. This was terrific.
There's always one in that pile, Steve. There's always one.
Well, I would like to say there was one, Bob, but I remember the dean called me in. I'll never forget this. About 12 years ago or so. The dean called me in, and he said, Doctor, we need to talk to you about something. I said, well, what's up? He goes, well, we got the student evaluations back. He said, you know, most of the students really liked your style. It was a course on crisis communication. And so these were students in business. They were in business. They were getting a master's degree. I'll never forget this. They were getting a master's degree. It was an MBA. And this was a course in crisis communication and leadership. So I was creating these case studies where something terrible happened in the company and they were having to respond. And long story short is I was creating these media interviews that you and I have talked about a lot, like how do you create these mock interviews. And so I was creating a lot of tension. Like it was bad for them, like something happened that wasn't good for the company. And so I was doing these mock interviews, putting them on old school. You know, we videotaped them. We looked at it again. I said, you know, let's talk, break this through, break it out, and where did you go wrong? And so some of the students said, Dean, I thought Dr. Adubato, he was too aggressive. And I said, well, Dean, you needed to be really aggressive because that's the way a reporter could be in that situation if something went wrong in the company. He goes, I know, but you really ought to back off a little bit. I said, and I remember thinking, I started to get very defensive. And I tried to start explaining to the dean why I was doing what I was doing, and I wasn't listening to what he was saying about the student feedback. And the point of this long-winded explanation is that I wasn't taking my own advice. I was so caught up in explaining myself.
You were being defensive.
Yeah, and you and I have had this conversation offline before about being defensive, and I couldn't care less about what he was saying. I was going to explain to him why I was doing what I was doing, and instead I didn't realize that there was I'm not going to say softer, but a different approach to doing what I was doing, and I potentially could have achieved the same thing, something really constructive and positive, without being so aggressive. And I learned, I've really thought about that since then. He was right. I was wrong.
Listen, we're two-thirds of the way through already, and we've got a lot of other ground to cover. So I'm just going to remind the audience you're listening to A Mutual Concern. I'm Bob Mann. This is WFDU's weekly award-winning public affairs broadcast, heard throughout the tri-state area, but then held as an archive for 2 weeks at WFDU.FM. Just go to WFDU.FM, go to the HD1 archives, find the date of the original broadcast, and then click on A Mutual Concern. My guest, Steve Adubato, who has just authored yet another book released called Lessons in Leadership. And I want to ask you, Steve, how this fits in with some of the other books that you've written over the years, including ones on crisis management and people making bonehead decisions, such as What Were They Thinking? How does Lessons in Leadership, for those who have read your books, fit into the whole picture of what you're offering?
The book before Lessons in Leadership was simply called You Are the Brand. And it was about how people and organizations build brands, how brands are destroyed, and brands, simply your public reputation, how one creates a brand, how brands are destroyed, and how brands that have been tarnished are rebuilt. So there are chapters. Ironically, I did a chapter on Donald Trump. I wrote the book 5 years ago, and I have a feeling I'm going to rewrite it, soon.
He's given us some new stuff, hasn't he?
Has something been going on with Trump?
A few things, just media blowing it out of proportion.
So, and also there's a chapter on "quote unquote" the Clinton brand, ironically. So, and the other book was simply called "What Were They Thinking?" on crisis communication. So, and the book before that, "Make the Connection." So, which is about interpersonal communication and making a human personal connection with other people. And so my point is, all these books, in one way or another, tries to understand how we communicate as people, as professionals, as human beings in our everyday lives, and not just in the workplace, but at home, and why we don't connect the way we think we do. I remember being in a doctoral program at Rutgers back in the day, and I remember a professor on the first day saying, we don't communicate as effectively as we think we do. And I said, what is that supposed to mean? And I've been thinking about it for, about 15, 20 years since then. We don't communicate as effectively as we think we do, meaning we walk around thinking the message we send is the message that is received. So message sent equals message received. We're not getting overly philosophical. I've become obsessed with the ideas of this idea. Why is it that the message we send is not the message received? What are the things that get in the way, and how can we improve the way we communicate so that there are greater odds that the message we intend to send? My wife and I this morning had a conversation about this. We have this little dog that I never wanted a dog. Our two younger children, our daughter is 6 and our younger son is 12. They wanted a dog. Didn't want a dog. We got a dog. And so finally got this little dog, and the point of the story is that I said to my wife, I got up in the middle of the night, and there's the dog looking at me. And he's in the kitchen, and I said to my wife at about 4 in the morning, I said, why is Vinny, his name is Vinny Adubato, he's an Italian dog. So I said, what's up with Vinny? I said, he's in the kitchen, and I think he took care of his business in the kitchen. I said, what's up with that? She goes, so you expect me to get up in the middle of the night and take him for a walk? He's a puppy. What do you want? And it's not what I was saying. I didn't mean I wanted her to take him for a walk. What I meant was, why was he in the kitchen? And I thought we agreed he should have been in another part of the house. And so I didn't say anything. And this morning we had this whole discussion, and I realized that I was having a hard time getting across my message, which was that when we agreed to get the puppy, I never thought he'd be in the kitchen. I thought he'd be in the basement. And she was saying, well, he's a puppy. Are you going to walk him in the middle of the night? You want me to walk him in the middle of the night? You want me to get up?
She filled in the blank for you with what she was concerned that you were saying, and you weren't saying it at all.
Right. So message sent rarely equals message received, even when two people have the best intentions and care about each other deeply. And so I'm like, whoa, check yourself and ask yourself, how can you better get that message across? And that's where this whole thing about emotional intelligence and empathy and trying to step back, it's complicated stuff. Like people say, Adubato, you're overanalyzing this. Realize, my friends say, oh, you're overanalyzing this. Everything is complicated about communication. I said, okay, so you're walking around thinking you're communicating as effectively as you think you are. Fine. Trust me, you're not. You're not. You feel better that way about yourself, but most people think you meant something else. So anyway.
Listen, while I've got you here, though, because of the fact that this is different from the national show on the local level, you are known because of your public affairs television shows. Just tell the audience, in case they're not familiar with the many shows that you do on television on a regular basis, which cover politics and government and other subjects in great detail.
Well, I'm partners. I've headed up a not-for-profit production company in the New York, New Jersey region for over 20 years. And we produce programming every night on public broadcasting with WNET, the flagship station out of New York City, seen in Connecticut and New York and New Jersey. It's called One-on-One with Steve Adubato every night on NJTV, the public television station in New Jersey, as well as WNET in New York, and also on FiOS in the region. And a show called Capitol Report on public affairs, looking at issues in the State House in New Jersey and that program. And also, I'm a contributor to Metro Focus, which is the newly created PBS series. Last year or so, Neil Shapiro, the president of WNET in New York, and the team created a series called Metro Focus and Nightly, where I'm a contributor. I do commentary and analysis and interviews with a great group of anchors over there. And it's just, listen, being a part of PBS in this region for over 20 years has been a blessing. I love the national work that I do occasionally on national issues and politics and media, but my bread and butter, my heart and soul is tied up in public broadcasting because, as you well know, Bob, there are not many places you get to do substantive work about things that matter and talk to fascinating people, which you do all the time, on a regular basis, and actually get paid for it occasionally.
Are people still interested enough in the details, Steve? That's what worries me in this election in particular.
In the details, no. In the things that matter in their lives, yes. And so here's the trick. How can we present information to them? How do we engage them in a conversation about crime, the environment, the economy, the things that matter, how our country's ever going to come together since we're so divided, race, et cetera, et cetera. How can we present those issues and get them engaged in a conversation? Not the details, because the details, the minutia, I will tell you, is for the policy wonks. How do we get people engaged in that conversation to help them understand that they have a stake, and our democracy, our country will never succeed without them being a part of that and being a part of the solution? That's the trick. That's the game. That's what we try to do every day.
It's interesting to try to make serious issues entertaining without making them entertainment, and I think that's where the media has fallen short in the age of reality TV and sensationalistic news.
You're not going to get an argument from me, Bob Mann.
Listen, I want to finish up in these last 3 minutes with a quote you have in the jacket of Lessons in Leadership. It is from a Mr. Lawrence Peter Berra, who, of course, had lived in Upper Montclair, New Jersey. Of course, it's Yogi, if you're not a Yankee fan and don't know that full name. But it's public speaking is always one of the best things I hate. But Steve always tells it right, and he can make any talk easier than it sounds. When you've got Yogi saying you can teach public speaking, I guess you've gotten to the mountaintop.
Well, here's the irony of the Yogi quote and everything about Yogi. I'll never forget the interview I did with Yogi a few years back, the late, great Yogi Berra. And as a Yankee fan, it was a big deal to me. Yogi and his wife, late wife Carmen, went to the same church that I go to, Immaculate Conception Church in Montclair, New Jersey, where he, in fact, his funeral mass was. And Yogi was such a neighborhood guy, and I'll get right to the point because I know his time is tight. Yogi was just one of these guys that just was friendly with everyone. He was just so personable, just a regular guy. But I remember Yogi was in the studio, and it was such a big deal. Even though I knew him for years, I was like, Yogi's in the house, and his son Dale was there, and everybody else, his entourage was there. Yogi was giving me one-word answers. I said, Yogi, what was it like playing with Mickey Mantle? And he was like, it was pretty good. Yogi, so Whitey Ford, the great number 16, Whitey Ford was your best friend with Phil Rizzuto. Come on, it was great. He goes, not bad. I said, Yogi, hold on, Yogi. I got a half hour. And my producers are in
Only 28 minutes to go.
Yeah, in my earpiece saying, Steve, you got to get more. And I wanted to say to them, you come out here and try. And so I thought Yogi was busting my chops because Joe Pesci, in another interview I had done, was doing the same sort of thing, except I think Pesci really was trying to give me a hard time, but Yogi was being Yogi.
Oh, man.
He wasn't in the mood, and he wasn't going to talk, and he had nothing. And I did a half hour of Yogi doing that.
I got to tell you, it is tough to do 28 minutes and 30 seconds, but when the answers are one words, and I've had that, as a matter of fact, it can just be torture. That clock just sticks. However, with you, Steve, the clock flies, and that I always appreciate. Thank you.
Well, that's what you get for getting someone on who can't shut up. I have to work on being more concise and to the point, which is another chapter in Lessons in Leadership.
There you go. But listen, we're going to get out on time because you know what 28:30 is in your head, too.
It's a hard out.
I always appreciate it. Steve Adubato, the book is Lessons in Leadership. It's Rutgers University Press, right, Steve?
It sure is, and I want to thank my colleagues and friends and partners at Rutgers University Press. That's 4 books with them, Simon & Schuster before that, and you cannot do it without great publishers.
Well, listen, please check out the book because of the fact that you really will get pointers about not only the technique, but the philosophy of all of this. Steve Adubato, Lessons in Leadership. That's it for this episode of Mutual Concern. I'm Bob Mann. We're with you on the radio every single Sunday. It's a weekly show. But most importantly, you can check it out on the web at WFDU.FM. Every week, we talk about politics and healthcare, public safety. In the tri-state area, all matters of mutual concern.